A little while, but we're back. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Are we allowed to say that in mid-March? This doesn't speak to our organisation at all. Thought we'd talk about awakening today. How you feel about the topic of awakening? You ready to rock and roll?
See where we go with it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are curious about it, and it seems to be, a lot more popular in the media these days, social media, and there's a lot more talk about it. And, they're going to be a good opportunity to share, both of our respective experiences. And, everyone has a unique take on awakening, why we pursue it, what it means, what it is. And so I thought we'd take a bit of time on that and just explore. Cool.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right, good. So this is one of 5 major areas of integral theory. And Ken Wilber, we obviously practice integral theory as coaches in our particular specialty. And one of the lines of development, or one of the 5 aspects of development, is called waking up. So, progressively awakening to a greater reality. And so I thought I'd just start really broadly. What is waking up? I'd love to hear, your point of view on what is waking up, and I'll share mine, and let's jam.
But if you want to go with what you're talking about in terms of integral theory, then I'm happy to go on from there as it's been mapped.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So waking up, in my meaning making structures, is all about our spiritual intelligence. So it's when, we start to desire or evolve or grow into more recognition of the spiritual nature of our being, and perhaps, less so about our material sense of our being, the physicality of our being. So, that would be the first sort of differentiation that I would make. And, a lot of people will never really get to a deep understanding of their spiritual nature. A lot of people might take, let's say, a new age approach, and there's so many different varieties and shapes and sizes and flavors of new age spirituality. Some people gravitate to that more than others. And then, some people will gravitate to perhaps more traditional styles of waking up through meditation or self-inquiry or contemplation or whatever it is. And whatever the vehicle, it really doesn't matter. What we're seeking to access is a deeper understanding of who we are, and, I guess what's been labeled by integral theory as spiritual intelligence, which probably isn't really intelligence at all. And that's where I'll start.
Yeah. So can you say more about the new age thing? What does the new age look like if it's not through meditation, and what is it?
Well, I think, let's say from the 70s through to now, there's been different flavors of it, and it could be as simple as doing breath work, so I would probably put, let's say, Wim Hof into that category. Maybe certain aspects of, let's say, holotropic breath work, but using the breath, pranayama, some of the basics of yoga, not the whole school of yoga, but let's say breath work as a modality, I think is getting in touch with our spirituality, but it's perhaps more new age. Some of, let's say, clairvoyancy, clairsentience, clairaudience, remote viewing, telekinesis, contact with the other side. These are very much, I would categorize in the new age spirituality realm. Not to say that I'm right, it's just the way that I frame these things. And then let's say perhaps the more traditional approaches from the wisdom traditions, whether it's, Tibetan practices, Catholicism practices, Christian practices, Hindu practices, Vedanta, all those kind of schools of thought, they're perhaps more the ancient Eastern wisdom traditions. And that's a little different in my mind than, let's say, the new age.
Sure.
Spirituality.
Different ways, same goal in theory, for sure.
Yeah.
Broadening the spectrum of it.
And it's not to rank or, to put one down or to elevate another. It's everyone gravitates to their path. Go on.
Yeah. And I think that's a bit, it's a valuable point, because, a lot of people will be glued to their own way, and their own way being the best way. And it's really, when we look at it from an integral perspective, it's to see there's different ways for different people, and each individual will find their way, whether it's through religion, whether it's through breathwork, whether it's through meditation, whether it's through doing, neuro-linguistic programming, finding out about yourselves, through those sorts of modalities. So it's to say there is no right or wrong way. It's whatever way works for the individual in order to help to free them. So I think on that point, from a slightly, let's say, an earlier potential way of, in terms of that waking up, is also, waking up to ourselves as to how we have become the way we have become in our conditioned personality. So I think there's many ways where we look at, say, the waking up in terms of waking up to our spiritual, nature. But prior to that is the understanding of ourselves. So for some people that will be waking up. And I know in Integral, it's not necessarily the way that it's framed there, but it's like as a stage process, it might be for some people to go, waking up to me is to actually realize how I've become the way I have become. Why am I a people pleaser? Why am I so disagreeable? Why am I so judgmental? Yeah, why can't I speak my truth? Where's my voice? So it's kind of like that stage process of let's start to understand the personality and how that's been formed, and a later stage, because otherwise we might just be going to bypass a whole, important part of who we've become. And I think with the whole spiritual part, it's like saying that some people will never get to a stage maybe in their lives where they have explored it, but it's actually the true essence and nature of us anyway. So we are all spiritual. So when we fall asleep at night and we're in our deepest sleep state, when the personality's up there, when we've got no thoughts running, we're actually already spiritual. We just don't have awareness to it. And a lot of this work in that waking up space is simply bringing awareness back to the essence of us, which was always there and is always there. But there's so much of the thinking, the feeling, the emotions, all of the rest of it that's kind of layered on top of it, so that we don't get to actually recognize that. And we may not get to recognize that until, we're the physical body dies. So.
Yeah, love it. I mean, there's so many places we could go. And one of the things that, I really love about when we first started working together, you sort of coined the process of re-remembering. And, I do love that, because it's true. Everyone's already awake. But for those that are really desperate and really desire to recognize their own awakening, it can be a real challenge. They could spend 20, 30 years meditating and not really recognize their essence or their fundamental nature. And so, we want to hold all those perspectives with compassion at the same time as we get in touch with our spiritual side. One of the things I'd love to do today is just perhaps separate what we would call the growing up, which is working on the personality, cleaning up the shadow, opening up your mind to greater possibilities. Each of those things, I think we leave those for the moment, and we do a separate session on each of those. And I'd really love to dive deep into the waking up today, if you're cool with that.
Yeah. But anyone that's listening, this isn't to jump straight to this. So there are other episodes to come on those earlier stages, because it is a thing, though. There are people that will, because it's hard. The earlier stages of this process are difficult. And sometimes it is easier for some, not for everyone, but to want to, simply go into a meditative process without having explored it. And, the people that may sit for 20, 30 years, if they're not getting anywhere, it may be because they're not doing the earlier stage work. So they may sit and have a experience, or they may have, a nice time meditating, but can they hold that throughout their days? Probably not, if they haven't managed to look at all of the stuff that comes before. So we are doing a jump here. So not to, discount any of the work that comes before.
Totally agree. And I'm happy to share some of my experiences in that too. And I know we've discussed that a few times. So I'd just love to invite you to reflect on, why is waking up important, for you personally, and then, for people that might be listening, why do we feel as though it's important?
I think it's going back to that, that piece about it's the true essence, it's the true nature of us. So it's like there's, pre-birth, as we come into the world, in theory, there's a very blank canvas that we are, you know, born into, we already are. And so the importance of it is, you know, getting to an age where there is a realization that there has to be more than just this suffering that most people are in. And I got that quite early on. And maybe there was a remembering of something already, you know, at that point that didn't want to be let go of. So for me personally, it's important to me because I don't want to experience a whole life of just simply suffering through the mind. So to be able to access more of that true essence, true nature of us, of myself, of my non-self, let's say, why not? And I think there's you know, a really big part with me as well, where the personality type, if anyone knows the Enneagram, is, you know, it's one of the personality typology systems, and my personality type is to be prepared for worst case scenarios. So there's a constant preparation throughout life of this. And when I started doing this work, at some point I was like, I'm already preparing myself for death, so I won't fear it as much as I get older. Yeah, so this kind of came online a few years ago, where it's like, the earlier I start this preparation for the dying, the less I'm going to be in pain when I'm in my later years, fearing this thing that most of us fear, right? Most of us are fearing anything we do ultimately is going to lead to the death of us. And that's what we're trying to avoid all of our lives, even though it's the thing that is actually the only thing that's guaranteed in life from a, you know, let's say from a physical body.
Taxes aren't guaranteed, right?
Exactly. So, so for me, it's like there's this thing of going, on this quest of, you know, from a younger age, like, how do we be happy as humans, as a child, looking around going, you know, why are these people, you know, these grown-ups not happy? And they're making it a mission to be happy, then to later in life going, actually, it's not about happiness. It's maybe about just feeling better than I do now, to maybe then go, and actually, is there something more peaceful? To then go and actually, what's beyond this that is going to be experienced in theory when the body dies, but how about having a piece of that which is possible whilst still alive?
Yeah,
to have a full experience
while we're alive, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's so cool. You know, thanks for sharing. Just to reflect from here, you know, it was weird because I can identify with a lot of people that don't really you know, think that their spirituality is a major part of their life, because, you know, for the first probably 35, 36 years here, it wasn't anywhere part of my life at all. You know, other than to say that up until, let's say, the age of 5 or 6, you know, I used to have some really vivid experiences, but I'd really forgotten about all of them. And, you know, I'd gone into, you know, the type 3 sort of strive, drive, achiever, rebel, etc., all of that stuff in the personality. And then, you know, I burn out, as I think most people would know if you've been listening to us for a little while. And that forced a change in direction of life for me. And I'm kind of like, there's got to be more than just earning money and drinking beers and, you know, having fun. And so that was the seed of my remembering, if you like. And then I tried a whole bunch of new age spirituality for years, you know, a few years, probably 3 or 4. And, you know, a couple of the people that we both mutually know, you know, introduced me to some different ways of thinking about spirituality. I started listening a lot more on YouTube to various different people. And then just by luck, you know, we came together and started working, and, you know, we were talking about this stuff, and you kind of propelled me on a little bit. And I met a fellow by the name of Dan Brown at the time. And, you know, I just thought that Dan was an amazing human being. And so that's how I kind of got introduced to it. And once, you know, I had a little taste of the genuine thing, it just became almost like perversely like an obsession. So that's
another achievement, another thing to conquer.
It was actually, like, if I'm honest, it was a little bit of achievement. It was a little bit of, you know, what are other people experiencing that I'm not experiencing? You know, I wonder what that's like. I'm an immensely curious person. So that's what drove, you know, the initial stages. And then you have to let go of all of that to, you know, see it, I guess. It's a real paradox, isn't it? But I
think there's quite a typical story that you tell there. We often hear people, I remember when I first moved to Australia and there was lots of yoga teachers around, which I hadn't really met before. And there was a typical story, right? There was a burnout. There was a corporate world burnout, which led to the kind of the spiritual path. And I really started to reflect on this because I remember being younger and watching some adults around me suddenly become religious. And that was way back when, right? And so now, as I got to the age that they were at when they started to turn to God, I just saw we're doing the same thing. We're now getting to a certain age where we're trying to look for something to bring us some hope, to bring us something better. And it doesn't matter whether it's religion and it's God in a religious, and it may be said that it's an earlier stage of development, than this, but it's still on behalf of the same thing. We still want saving, right? We still want something to help us, to help us get out of this mind and hope for something better, hope for something more peaceful. So I see a lot of people around, our age, a little bit younger now, maybe it's coming in a bit more, but we want something to kind of to come and save us, right?
So we want to calm the thinking mind, and I always view it as we want to reduce the reactivity, to external stimulus. And when I say reactivity, I guess, we were talking about it this morning, but, the responsiveness of the nervous system and the engagement of the emotional system. So, most people suffer through their emotions and suffer through their overwhelm and overthinking. And, I guess that's why this is important. If we can practice our waking up by whatever modality and whatever means works for you as a person, and, we can start to get beyond or reduce the suffering, then what lies on the other side is contentment and joy and bliss and all sorts of other things, which we'll get to as we go. Is there anything else you wanted to say on why it might be important?
I think in terms of humanity as a whole, we need saving. So it's like, this is why I really do reinforce the earlier stage part of this, because if we're not doing the work on those earlier stages, we're going to sit and have some nice meditations and some nice breath works and some nice classes. And then when we step back into the world and we haven't resolved, those earlier things, we're going to carry on warring, and then the world carries on warring. So in terms of waking up for humanity, amazing. But waking up to ourselves first and all of our stuff and having compassion and all the rest of it for ourselves before we sit in a permanent state of meditation is the savior that the world needs, that humanity needs. So, this is the greatest importance for us to carry on if that's what we're meant to be doing, right? If that's the grand plan for humans is to carry on, then we got to we got to be doing this stuff, or we got no chance.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, let's not take a red pill today, but it'll be so interesting with this, revolution of AI, what it might do to the spirituality of human beings. I think we could spend about an hour on that alone, right?
Yeah, bring in the spiritual robots, if we're going to extinct ourselves through building robots that are more emotionally intelligent than us or more woke than us, then there it is,
Just in our masterminds, just for those that are listening, Anita does like taking us on a little tour of AI and its impacts on humanity every now and again. I do have a bit of a chuckle. It's good fun.
This is so. I want to add to that in that vein as well. I've been watching so many fear-based podcasts and all the rest of it of what is going to happen when AI takes, it's already taking over stage anyway, but with all of this happening, and there's that part for me that comes in, the quicker that we wake up, the more potential is that we will be more okay in whatever happens than we may be right now, as long as the physical bodies are still surviving, right? And I think that's the thing to look at. The more that we're in fear of AI, the more we carry on with that fear, the more we continue with that, the more we're really going to suffer if this stuff is taking all of our jobs and all the rest of it. The more awake we are, the more clear, the more present we are, the more tools we've got to, bring ourselves back to now, the better we are going to be. So if there's one thing, we can't predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen with all of this. what we can do, if we choose to do, is the inner, keep working on the inner stuff to calm ourselves and, that
to be okay, whatever the weather.
Yeah, as much as we can. So
yeah, I love that. Yeah, so cool. Now we're going into some really interesting territory here. I think we're going to have a great discussion. From your perspective, what's involved in the work? And, maybe you can start with your personal experience, or you can start from a more general spot, or I can start whatever you like. But what's involved in the work?
Yeah, you go. I'll just start with the pre-waking up stuff, right? So if you want to go with waking up.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I'm with you on that. So, yeah, all of the pre-waking up stuff, like the growing up to become an adult, and to be responsible for yourself and clean up your trauma and, investigate your shadows and all that, I am on board. And then, when we explore it in more depth, I think there's some nuance to it. Happy to share some thoughts on that. But waking up for me, I think you can do it so many different ways. There's no one way. For me, I've followed a particular path. It's the Tibetan path. And, I feel really fortunate to have stumbled upon that through Dan Brown's work. And it's been incredible. It's been an incredible path to follow. But you can do it so many different ways. I mean, there's meditating. And I'll say a couple of things on that in a moment. There's self-inquiry. So the process of asking reflective questions, to your ego, ultimately until your ego breaks. It's the process of contemplation or self-inquiry. Some people like to do it that way. That can be like a very Zen way of doing it. Like, just go and sit and stare at a wall for, 10 days until you self-combust, and then you'll see the nature of reality. Or you can do it through more of a self-questioning approach. So self-inquiry and contemplation. They're the main ones that I sort of see floating around. And then we've got the new age stuff, which I touched on a little bit earlier. And when we get to talking about, awakening as a phenomena, we might go into a little more detail about what the differences might be between the different styles. But for me, it's been a meditation process for the best part of 3 years, I would say, since I got serious about it. With a little hint of contemplation and self-inquiry, but mostly meditation. And I would say the biggest thing for me has been to learn how to meditate properly. And, whilst on one hand I say that, my path is no one else's, like everyone's got a different path, I think there's a lot of meditation out there that's not real meditation, actually. Just sitting down and closing your eyes is not meditating.
It's all about the experience. If someone's having a clear experience, it doesn't matter what
having
your
a clear experience, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. So it's a perspective of yours on
it's something. A perspective of mine. And, it's just in conversations and coaching people, you hear their experience. And so you can start to get a sense for it. For me, it was being pointed out, how to remember that was really important. To get some progress and confidence and trust and patience in the process. And then, like you kind of said, for some people, they might wake up in an instant, and I know we've talked about this before. Some people have an experience that they wake up in an instant. For most, it's a more gradual process. And for me, it's been a gradual process. And then, even when recognizing awakening, like you said, if we haven't fully done all the work before at the earlier stages, you can get dragged back down into the muck. And, that's certainly been...
That's most people's experience. Yeah, there's very few that wake up and wake up. It's most people will go and meditate, come back into their day-to-day, go off meditate, come back into their day-to-day. That's normal. That's
some people
normal.
might call that process, the dark night of the soul or the dark night of the spirit. Like it's a phenomenology in the body where you've kind of recognized something, but you haven't anchored it. And, there's this energetic process in the body that really changes quite profoundly. And some people label that as a dark night. But yeah, so for me, what's involved in the work, it's been mainly meditation. And so, happy to jam on it more, but how about you?
Yeah. Okay, if we're going there, then I would say that there was a moment probably about 10 years ago where there was an instant moment of something that hadn't been experienced, let's say, before. And from that, there was a lot of confusion in what was happening. And probably 2 years on from that, that's when I started training in coach training and started doing work with one of my, say, the coaches, did plenty of courses there. And there was one particular course that I took many times, and that was basically a system of awakening. So it was a modality that kind of showed the whole system of awakening. And so what really happened for me through that process, there was various, kind of discussions, meditations, all the rest of it that happened during these courses that I took many times. And what happened through that process was that I was then able to map exactly what had happened to me in 2015. And the experience that had been experienced back in 2015 then started to become more possible, because I realized how I had got to there, let's say cleared to there. And I was able then to start to access that state more and more. And me personally, the process of what I like to call presencing for me, I would do a lot of walking and spontaneous moments of real clarity, real clearness. It was like being in a really clear, the clearest of movie screens ever.
Agreed.
To then the realization in parts that I had completely lost myself. Let's say there was no acknowledgement of self or experience of self for moments, and only on reflection there was where did I just go? And I think that the way that I liken this when I talk about this is like when we might say you're staring into space and you're trying to get someone to kind of wake up. Well, you're actually bringing them back to falling asleep, because in those moments, if they've got nothing running, they're actually potentially in a really clear, and it's like zombie-like state, right? And we're talking, this is very high-level stuff that people would live in this state, less than 1% of humanity potentially. So it's just having those glimpses, and
0.01 apparently, according to Ken, but
yeah. So glimpses of that happening for me through that initial experience, and then a lot of work around understanding it. And I think for me, because that had happened, maybe I seemed to get it quite quickly, like that questioning process. I would sit in these courses and people would go, well, who am I, or whatever, and you keep going. Whereas for me, it was just like silence, silence, silence. There's no answer. The more we've got an answer to who we are, the more we are still in our unawakened state. The awakened state, there's just nothing. And for me, it was just, I don't know, it just made sense that the most clear we are is in our silence here. And, even in speaking. So, and then for me, then later breath work. Absolutely. That's my absolute go-to. Absolutely love breath work.
And have you found you've been able to, use breath work to, anchor the state you described in 2015?
Yeah, there's all sorts of things. Yeah, all sorts of states in breath work. And I think the most eye gazing as well is a big one. I've been doing all of these actually this week. Haven't been doing them for a while, but things like this are things that have really, there's been times where I'll do, eye gazing. I was at an event yesterday that they were doing it, and I literally just it's like there's just a blanking out, and then I'm supposed to be looking in this person's eyes and my eyes are now on their chest or whatever, because there just hasn't been, anyone there. The eyes have dropped.
Because that's your personality program.
I've just gone. So, and I think this was one of the ones, I think through the eye gazing and through the breath work, the experience then of starting to really not see form as form anymore. So, if we say, people listening may, we hear this stuff about it's all energy, right? Nothing is actually solid. There's no solid form. And what happens is we solidify through our visual, through our brain, let's say, we make things solid and structured. And so through this process of remembering, it's like then being in these processes where it's just seeing particles. It's no longer seeing anything as solid. And so these are kind of all stages. And then the I don't know, the loss of everything is the kind of, this is quite hard to language, but the loss of everything in theory when you're staring into space is the prior part, which is in theory the earliest part. And then we start to bring stuff into our awareness and start to see the particles. But we normally go from nothing to solid form. And there's this whole part in between of the complexity of us as human beings that we just totally miss. The most profound parts of us, because we're so in this tiny percentage of our anxieties, our worries, all of this stuff that we're so focused on that we miss the actual true potential of us in those silent parts. So, yeah.
And that's an amazing share. Thanks. And I don't think that you and I have ever gone that deep together on this topic, which is super cool. And I'll share a little bit about my experience. But first of all, I just want to say, like, there's way more sameness than difference in, I guess what's been phenomenologically, I don't even know the right word for it, but the phenomenology that has been here. And so you did a beautiful thing there, because you actually segued into, what's involved in the work to how do I know, if I'm awake. And I guess, like, just to couch that as a question in itself, I mean, we said at the start, we're all already awake. We're just remembering. So just to couch that. And then also, I don't know whether it'll depend on the listener, whether this is helpful or not. I do like to describe an awakening in a more tangible manner, because I think a lot of people get confused on what it is. And even though it's not an it, I think it's helpful to have some sort of description around it, which you've just beautifully done. So, I think in the tradition that I've followed and the discoveries as part of that process, it's really similar. So my first experience was on the fourth day of a retreat about 3 years ago. Felt like there was good meditation happening. Like there was parts or times where, there was no one there really monitoring or observing the experience. And, I'd have moments, but then we'd stop the meditation and I'd come back to, Andrew pretty quickly. And then I remember asking my meditation teacher, I'm like, to be honest, I'm like a little bit, frustrated here. I'm not sure whether I'm getting it or not. And I remember he said to me, he's like, just go for a walk, Andrew. And it was 4 a.m. in the morning, Anita, because this thing was being virtual streamed from the US. It was 4 a.m. in the morning. Now, a little bit later by that stage, actually. It was about 5. And the sun was just coming up. And I walked outside. And, the first thing I noticed when I walked outside, I came out of the gate and I turned the corner. And it was almost like there was just this blazing splendor. So everything just became so much more bright and luminous. And it was almost like the trees were lifting themselves up. I know this can sound really odd, but it was like everything was coming alive. There was this aliveness and the sparkling like you were talking about. And it was just right there and it was everywhere. And, I went for a little walk around 3 or 4 blocks and just felt this overwhelming sense of ecstasy and awe. Like it was almost like it was dripping from every pore or every cell of the body. And, came back to the meditation and, we all shared our experiences. And that was really what got me going. And, a lot of people would say that's a mystical experience. And I think that's true. But what became clear to me in that moment was that was touching into reality as it is. And so, over the last few years, that's progressively developed now to be a more stable state. And so the attributes of that for me now, phenomenologically, yeah, totally agree with you. Everything is crystal clear. It's like the whole thing is in 4K all the time. And the space is like a giant mirror. It's like glass. It's like a crystal clear pool of water. You can see through everything. It's transparent. You know, it'd be like looking into a pool on a really sunny day and being able to see all the way through it without any obstruction whatsoever. So that's the first thing that becomes really apparent. It's like that transparent.
It can, and I think that's the thing. It's not to, you know, when I speak to people, everyone will have some, you know, out of body experiences and things, you know, there's all sorts of things that when I talk to people, we'll go, oh yeah, that's theirs. So it's not to say this is necessarily going to be everyone's experience or has been. This isn't about us being right or wrong. And I think we've got to remember that part of this is that we are, as we explain this stuff, we're explaining it through our own meaning making, through our own lenses. So we may be having more similar experiences, but the way we language it may be different.
Yeah,
you know, so I think there's no right or wrong in this. It's whatever experience a person has.
It's not intended to be that way either. And you know, if this is helpful for people to get a little understanding, maybe you can compare your experience, and it's not to judge yourself or anyone else, but it's just a little marker as to what may happen. But yeah, I have similar phenomena to you. The objects themselves start to disappear. They start to dissolve. They start to blink in and out. It's like, are they there or are they not? And everything becomes, the objects become, you know, misty, and become translucent. It's almost like they shimmer. And so, you know, it's likened to being like looking at a moon in the water. And that's very much what's present here in experience, if you could say that, because there's no one really having experience. There's just experience itself. And so, you know, these are the kinds of phenomena that can arise.
And I have this quite interesting thing where back in the day, I don't know whether people can relate to this, but when we maybe feel faint or when we banged our head or something happens and we see stars, if people can relate to that, that then became, what I realized was that was the sparkling maybe that you're talking about. It's kind of those sparkles. And it's the same thing as when we become faint and lightheaded, it's like we haven't got the capacity to be thinking necessarily. And we're in kind of this state of, I'm going to say death, but it's like you've had a trauma response. And in that moment, you're actually seeing the sparkling that is the same that you would see through a meditation. Yeah, so these things I was like, I've seen these sparkles before. Where have I seen them? And then the next day I'll feel a bit lightheaded and then the sparkles, and I'll be like, that's the same thing.
Right.
So it's quite interesting. Yeah, having those sorts
definitely
of experiences.
The sparkling. You know, it's really interesting. Sometimes the sparkling can almost be like little pops of stars. Sometimes it can be colored pixels. Sometimes it can be blobs. Sometimes it can be shapes like triangles and squares. And depending on where you're at with the practice. And in the Tibetan world, they actually have specific practices around the visionary aspect of this stuff where that develops more and more. But what the Tibetans would say about that is it's the spontaneous presence. And so, you know, those sparkles are actually thoughts that haven't elaborated. They haven't become concepts and they haven't become objects. And you start to recognize that you don't have any thoughts actually. It's, you know, they're being clung to and grabbed from awareness. And so they're not even a thing, but everything's just arising in and of itself and freeing in and of itself. And this is what you start to see, you know, in these kind of states, which is pretty interesting. Now, I haven't had as much of the experience of, let's say, prior to awareness. That hasn't been a big part of my path. I know some people, you know, they enter this state called Nirodha, and that's where everything just ceases. You know, in our particular path, that's not encouraged. It's not looked upon as being something that's of any value. And, you know, what the Tibetans would say is that they would say that that's unawareness. And so they're very, and I'm not here to suggest that anyone's right or wrong.
Depends where people want to go, how far they want to take.
Depends how people want to go. But what I would say just in terms of realizations is it's like, well, there can be no thinking, but an immediate spontaneous knowing. And so this comes from somewhere. It's not a thing, but it arises from the field itself. And so it's not an unawareness, it's a complete, lucid, awake wisdom. And so this is a little bit of the difference, let's say, in some of the traditions. You know, some would say that it's about lights out.
I think it's however far you want to take it, because it's still a process within a process. So they kind of want to argue with each other, but they're all, what they're missing a lot of the times, like with religion, is it's all the same thing. And how far do we want to take it? And I think that's the interesting thing that is going to happen, whether it's in our lifetime, the next one we come into, or whatever happens, is how far are people going to want to take this, or how far is it going to want to go? So at the moment, we'll be like, there's a very, less than 1% of humanity are accessing that, but those percentages are growing. So we can sit here in our judgment or non-judgment of what we want to do and what we know ourselves as humans and what we want to cling to. But what's the evolution of humanity beyond our lifetime potentially? And maybe that's what's needed in order for things to be a bit more peaceful in the world. Who knows, right? Because we're always trying to improve something. So it's kind of like that's potentially the way that it's headed.
One other thing I'll mention before we sort of get off the topic of the phenomenology of awakening is there's another way you can recognize if you're operating from an awakened basis. And that is that there's no location in your experience at all. So we've talked about the phenomenological side of it. Most people will perceive themselves as being solid and looking out from the eyes directly in front. And, one thing that can happen is that there can be a non-localization of experience. And so, a lot of people will say, well, I have this feeling of oneness. I become large, I become huge. There's no boundary anywhere. And this is, what's probably known in Ken's work as unity consciousness. And so that's very true here. And then there's even stages beyond that where it all folds back in on itself. And so there's not a concentration of a me in a body anymore. There's just this happening all of the time and spontaneously. And I think you might label that as presence. A lot of people label it as presence, and that's cool. It's very true. It's like immediate. It's like right here, right now. And it's all doing itself all the time. So that's the other way to, a lot of people might have an experience where they felt like the ground's moving under their feet, or the sky's falling, or their whole spatial dimension of reality is just changing. This is non-localization.
I have a lot of that the internal, as like through breath work. It's like the feeling that this isn't solid, that it's like a wave or whatever. And then I'll open my eyes and I'll watch my hands, and even though they're still, I can see this subtle energy of movement, let's say.
Right.
So all sorts of different.
What can freak some people out is when their hands completely disappear after they've seen this. We have a few clients that have that.
That's good. We're on time, it looks like, anyway. So I think for me, I would love to hear if this is of any interest to anyone, and if actually people want to share anything or have any questions, so that if we do continue with this conversation, then it's something that is of interest to others. So please feel free to get in touch and tell us what may happen for you, or what interest you may have in this. Love to hear.